Yeah, so Old Life, we were called the the Online Publishers Association. We are the only association that's exclusively focused on content companies. So all of our members are content companies. So importantly, our association doesn't include ad tech companies, distributors, et cetera. Pure content companies. What's important to understand when you think about these brands is every one of them has a direct and trusted relationship with consumers and advertisers. So every brand in our membership is a known household brand, and marketers and consumers do business with them and know that they are. Also, we look at the entire revenue mix, which is important to this discussion, but it's good to understand that across our membership, about 85% of their revenue comes from advertising. 85% comes from advertising. And the brands up there, you can see we've actually grown from about 40 some members to doubled in size to 75 in the past 2 years. But those brands include new companies, old companies, native digital companies, the Washington Post, New York Times, ESPN, Texas Tribune, so all sorts of brands. Skipping forward, there we go. Just to frame this discussion, I said 85% of our revenue comes from advertising. Kinsey referenced this earlier today, that the Times revenue growth had all come from non-advertising. If you look at the past 5 years, all of the growth which our industry talks about in digital advertising, which is about 15 to 20% per year, all of that growth has gone to intermediaries, which includes ad tech companies, and it's gone to very large distributors, Google, Facebook being the obvious ones, Twitter to a lesser extent. And so what these companies have in common, though, is they have enormous wealth of data. And they're able to collect that data and see most of the web in a way that an individual content company or publisher can't do. They see most of the web. And that is a great strength. And the content companies have been relatively flat over the past 5 years, represented in the red. And Jed talked a lot about all the elements of that bucket. So I like to just kind of simplify the problem around the word trust. If you simplify digital media and you just think about what makes digital media thrive, there's really 3 stakeholders that matter. There's the consumer, we get that. There's the advertiser that subsidizes much of this content, and then there's the publisher. And you all understand that role. And it's the fair value exchange and the trust between those 3 stakeholders that makes digital media work. And I know in this room we think about trust in terms of editorial integrity journalism. But for this discussion, I mean the confidence you're going to get what you expect in return. So when Jeff describes what Vice Media does, absolutely, that's the cool factor. What BuzzFeed does, what The Onion does, what the Times, the Washington Post do. There's an expectation of value. And all the parties in that chain right now are in a crisis of trust, I would call it. Jed described a lot of the marketing issues. Skipping towards ad blocking, which is part of our topic here, there's been this need to, when advertising revenue hasn't been growing, there's been this need for a publisher to pay for the journalists and the entertainment. And so, yes, they've been adding more and more ads to the pages, trying to find new ways to get more revenue out of a web page, leading to more and more clutter, more and more data collection, and ultimately a loss in audience goodwill. Audience goodwill and trust being the most important asset of any brand and publisher. There's a stat that we've been tracking for about 4 years now, and probably the best source of it is Nielsen. They put out a trust in advertising report every year. And digital advertising, going on 4 years, is always at the very, very bottom of the least trusted form of advertising. And I'm the digital guy telling you this. So you've got television, newspapers, magazines above it, and down at the bottom you've got native, mobile, social. So you have an issue of trust in digital advertising with consumers. Fairly logical how we got to this problem of ad blocking. If you paid attention for the last 5 years, it's very simple how we got here. And so now consumers are boycotting all ads. This is one page view. You've seen stuff like this before. This is one page view on one website. Over 400 third-party calls, tags, interactions with companies that the consumer had no desire to interact with when they visited this page, which is the Washington Times website, just to be transparent. A lot of sites are some degree of this. And that, everybody gets focused on the privacy piece. I talk a lot about privacy and consumer trust, but that complexity introduces all sorts of vulnerability. It introduces issues of fraud, it introduces issue of measurement, and it gums up the page. It creates, if you take any site that looks like that behind the scenes, typically the front of the site looks pretty terrible too. So take that all into consideration. The research we've been doing a lot of it at DCN, the consumer research in particular shows a worrying trend of ad blocking adoption. We're at about 15% of the US audience now, and the data says it's going to continue to grow. It's not growing geometrically, it's not really hockey sticking, but it's growing linearly and consistently. And the idea that you're actually going to turn that around while the technology behind our wonderful open internet is getting more complicated, I think could be a lot of hope. And so I think we, as an industry, need to assume at this point that there's this loss of consumer trust, and the solution to it is going to be some form of ad blocking. And that solution won't be ad blocking as we know it now, and it certainly won't be AdBlock Plus, which is the most popular version of it, which has all sorts of questionable business practices behind it. But there's going to be something that's going to protect the consumer experience and why they're installing ad blocking. It's going to actually take care of the privacy issue, the security issue, and the performance issue. And AMP might be that solution that Google's offered, but it might be something built into the browser. But expect that that's going to continue to, there's going to be more and more adoption, and you're going to have to evolve to solve for it. So the provocative challenge here is to flip this around and think about that audience as an opportunity. There is 45 million people now, and growing, in America that are using an ad blocker, that have said, I'm out. They're of no value right now to advertisers or publishers. But they're probably the most important demographic. They're all young millennials. They really understand the digital medium. They are the future. And they all want high-quality journalism. They all want great entertainment. And so they're the most likely to give your attention, the most likely to say, okay, if you have a better experience to offer me, I will opt back in to these new terms. And that's really the opportunity here. And it is, I'm not exaggerating when I say I think it really is a unicorn opportunity to find a way to rethink your value proposition to this audience. And it might not be just about advertising, but you'll adjust the new terms of the deal. Last point I'm going to make, in terms of doing that, obviously 100% focus on the consumers. We do need to rid as much as we can, and I think the people in this room can help here, and I think Dan Gilmore did a great job covering this a couple weeks ago in a piece he wrote. We need to purge the marketplace of what I call the trust parasites. These are companies that are actually taking out more than they're putting in. Dan focused, I think, on Facebook, which has incredible value to our ecosystem, so don't misread this point. But he focused specifically on the way they're able to collect data across the entire web, and that publishers should push back on that sort of data collection, and also should demand better data in return for their content. I don't know how that's going to evolve, but the point is, we need to be smarter about what this technology is doing and how that value exchange is happening, particularly around first-party versus third-party data. I'll stop there.